off the throne. We have it here. This is the own. No mountain, no hill.
Just about 17 minutes after the hour of 7 o'clock, welcome back to the Now Morning Show. Now, we are continuing our conversation as it is Zero Discrimination Day. And of course, this day highlights how people can become informed about and promote inclusion, compassion, peace, and above all, a movement for change. This morning, I'm joined by Treasurer at HRMATT, Miss Antonia Ferrier. Antonia is a social scientist, business psychologist, and certified emotional intelligence consultant with a wide array of specialist certifications that include job evaluation, process design, change management, financial planning, balanced scorecards, data visualization, analytics, and sustainable business development. She's currently helping corporate clients rebuild their business models within ecosystems and to develop adaptive strategies with their interval planning methodology. Miss Ferrier, good morning.
Good morning.
I just wanted to read your bio because I wanted people to know that we are in good hands.
Yes.
And so I'm going to enjoy the conversation that we're going to have, particularly as we sought to unpack discrimination in the workplace.
Right.
Now, before we get there, tell us about HRMATT. I know it's not your first time on the show,
yes,
but just to remind our viewers about the association.
Yes. So HRMATT was started in October of 1989. So we're celebrating our 36th year of contributing to the development of the human resource professionals in Trinidad and the region, and of course contributing to national development through our advocacy. We are all for people development, and you will hear us talking more and more, not so much about HR in isolation, but more about people management, because in organizations, right now, the only way for you to succeed is really, and differentiate is going to be based on the quality of the people you have and the kinds of organization cultures that you have, and that puts us squarely into the management of people, and that is a shared remit. It's not exclusive to HR.
Yeah. Now, as we're talking about people, one of the things that, of course, exists with people is conflicts, and we're going to see conflicts, we're going to see discrimination.
Yes.
Let's talk a bit about what discrimination means and how can that manifest itself in the workplace.
Sure. So, before you get to discrimination, we need to appreciate that people are social creatures, and we are a product of the environment in which we are raised, the people we associate with. The associations bring with it certain experiences that create assumptions, perceptions, beliefs, a lot of unstated things, and these create our value system. Okay, so within there, we will have, because we are forming groups as social creatures, we tend to want to have things that are like us, as distinct as who is not like us. And out of that comes bias, okay? The more overt form, you call it prejudice. And, you know, we talk about, today I know we're celebrating zero discrimination, and getting to that is going to be a difficult thing because bias is inherent and it is often implicit. Although it turns now, when it becomes acted upon in a way that creates unfairness and injustice for others, it now becomes discrimination. So for example, I may have perceptions about you that are associated with your height. You know, we have the thing,
Napoleon complex.
The Napoleon complex. We have the ones associated with weight. We have biases and perceptions associated with color.
Yes.
Right? And that is one of the more explicit biases that we are familiar with, right? Racial discrimination, where we believe that one's skin tone dictates the quality of person and your competence and your capability. Okay? In Trinidad, we have other manifestations. I know we talk about racism as though it is the only thing, but in Trinidad we have a high correlation between skin color and social class. So we're actually more of a classist society than a racist society. It manifests like that. It displays as though it is racial undertones, but more often that is actually a classist kind of discrimination that says if you went to a certain school, you have a particular accent. Those things can carry you forward positively, or it could hold you back. Because because discrimination exists in context of where you are, what may work for you in one environment may work against you in another. And a simple thing as your school accent I am a consultant and a trainer facilitator. If I talk to certain people with my convent accent, they are off-put because they assume and believe that somebody who went to convent thinks that she is superior to me.
To others, yes.
Right? And therefore, you will now act in a way to sideline me in the workplace because I am not one of you. I am the other. In another environment, if I talk like the everyday man on the street and I use my dialect and my slang and thing, you will say, hey, that's not appropriate for the boardroom, right?
But then how do we overcome this? Is it as simple as saying, okay, we need to be more inclusive as a society? Is it more understanding that needs to take place, more communication that needs to take place? How do we, because earlier I was talking to someone and they basically said zero discrimination is an ideal.
Yes.
Because of how many people think and the implicit and explicit biases.
That's right.
And so how do we overcome that, at least to move towards a society where we can feel inclusive and we can feel as if we are not frowned upon because of who we are as people?
Yes, and so when you start with that understanding that zero discrimination is really an ideal, meaning it cannot really be achieved simply because the world and society is made up of individuals, each with their own experience of the world that shapes their perception. You cannot avoid people forming perceptions, assumptions, and beliefs that they hold on to. What you can do, though, is create formal structures and socialization processes that allow you to identify that this particular assumption, when associated with this particular person and this particular system, creates harm. Yes? And so it becomes first a function of you being aware of yourself.
Yeah.
And then a collective will. It has to be intentional. There has to be a collective will to want to see fairness and justice for all. And therefore, we must want to change. And so that starts with if I'm aware of what my biases and my perceptions are when I'm associating with you, and I'm keeping aware that when I act on those, I see from your reaction that you are feeling sidelined or harmed, or as though you are not getting an equitable treatment in a particular situation. The onus is on me, if I want to work towards zero discrimination, that I check myself, you know.
No, Antonia, but that also sounds like an ideal.
Yes.
And I say it also sounds like an ideal because people often experience discrimination in the workplace.
Yes.
But it also comes from their manager or their employer.
Again.
And so how do you, as an employee, work towards getting over that sort of discrimination in the workplace when the person who is doing you the injustice is your superior?
So this is where, again, the collective intent has to be there, okay? So an organization's culture is going to be made up of two things. And it is going to be the formal structures, the policies, the procedures, the systems, the stated values. So we can have a stated value that says no discrimination, right? But what actually drives the culture is the behavior. Discrimination, as I said, is the taking action using those biases in an unfair manner, right? So if your systems allow for discrimination unchecked, then your manager could get away with discriminating against you. If, however, your formal systems are working and you do have people monitoring and enforcing, and people have confidence and trust in those systems, your policies and practices to say, hey, my boss is treating me unfairly, and I trust and know there is a place where I can go and comfortably discuss what is happening to me to seek action for somebody else to adjudicate, to determine if just because I believe it's unfair doesn't necessarily mean it's unfair. It's, again, my perception. So it is not an easy thing to do. So organizations, cultures, the society as a whole can, I think, work towards tolerance. Yes?
Yes.
I think the zero discrimination is the ideal, but the tolerance is the overt part that we can do, that we can control, that we can manage. And it is not something that's going to happen with a one-off action. It requires constant checking yourself, checking on you.
Now, when you mention the values and the policies, is that where HR comes in terms of ensuring it is done, and in terms of ensuring that we have that adjudicator in the event there's some sort of conflict or some issue of discrimination in the workplace?
So HR can in fact play a very vital role in there. Because more often than not, the framework for the management of the people in the organization falls within the remit of the HR team. But the execution of those policies, again, is not HR. It's going to be everybody in the organization. So we start with the tone on the top. If it's all well and fine to have an exercise to say, okay, we're going to do an assessment of everybody, and so that we can build the awareness and of what the inherent characteristics of this organization is, what are the values that we actually believe, okay?
Right.
And then we can take an exercise to compare what we have assessed independently and compare it to the behaviors that we see, because that's really where the work is, to say, are we living the values that we espouse? So if we have decided as an organization, tone at the top says we will have zero tolerance for discrimination, then at the executive level, at the board level, we should be seeing a directive and a mandate to create those governance and the controls that would say, one, we must have this stated and published all over, right? So that employees can't say they were not aware that this type of behavior is not sanctioned. We must go beyond just writing pretty words on a wall and say, this value of discrimination, what does it look like in real life? And then we roll that down now into how can we measure the way we are behaving, okay? How can we control it in terms of when there is a fallout, when we have identified that the actual behavior is not aligned to this espoused value of fairness and justice and equity?
Yeah.
Is there recourse for the person to go and have it reviewed? So that's where your grievance policies come in, your anti-bullying policy comes in, okay? And discrimination, I know we tend to think of it and our mind goes to the overt one, the explicit one we see, which is racism, and we know about ageism and gender and that sort of things. But there are a lot of hidden biases that we don't even think about.
Such as?
Such as, have you ever tried to use a bathroom and can't fit? And that's the thing with it, right? We have an assumption about what the average size of a person is. That's based on when people didn't have KFC. I love using KFC in my analogies, right? If you look at pictures of our grandparents versus now, we are very different size and shape. But the bathrooms from long ago were a lot narrower.
And they still are.
And they still, and we're still designing on that principle. And we are not conscious and acting consciously to look at the way we are designing our office. How often have you been invited to a training and you can't get in, but if you are conscious about discrimination, do you check to see if somebody who is differently able can access it? When you are doing the show, do you have your the
ESL interpreter,
right? What is the experience for somebody who's blind, right? Now we have a new conversation about people who are neurodivergent, you know, the ADD, the autism and that sort of thing that we want to include in society, but are we designing jobs that will allow those people to find an equal place to their competence level in the workplace, okay? So when you really start having this conversation of exploring what are my own beliefs, don't go in it from a perspective of I am biased, right? I think that is the mistake that people make. And I always draw the example, you remember back 2 years ago with the guy that they killed, George Floyd? Right.
I think that's his name, but we can always correct it.
Yes, come back to it, right?
George Floyd, yes, yeah.
Right. And I remember at the time I was doing some EQ training and I ended up talking about it, this thing about black identity, right? And if you examine that and the treatment of it, the amount of implicit biases that came to play was so, when we saw it acted upon in such a horrendous way, it made everybody check themselves, right? But you saw two camps, people saying, well, this is just the way it is, and it's okay to believe that, right? And when we go now and we start saying, well, you have to stop doing that, something people didn't recognize, that pushback you got from the white people saying, but it's normal behavior. I can't change some things, that's just the way I know it. It is their reality.
Right.
They don't know anything other than their own experience. So when you tell me all of a sudden that everything that I know about life, I don't think I'm a bad person, but everything I know about life you're now telling me is wrong, what does that do for the other person? So we have to be careful not to overcorrect on other people in trying to get them to embrace us.
Antonia, quickly, how, coming back to HRMATT, of course, how can organizations sort of depend or reach out to HRMATT when they have these challenges in the workplace, and how will the association assist them? Okay, so we have a number of programs running this year. We are collaborating with the Ministry of Labor. Just yesterday, we had one about HIV and AIDS in the workplace, making sure that everybody, encouraging people to align themselves to the national policy. And we will continue with doing advocacy with the Ministry of Labor. We have some collaborations coming up with the IADB to look at the gender equity in the workplace. And of course, normal thing, you write to the secretariat at HRMATT.com and you send in your request that you need help and you need support. We have a slate of very, very well competent and well-established consultants, trainers, developers who can help you do things like have awareness sessions, who can help you do those assessments to see to help you surface your biases. Because once you surface it, then you can have a conversation. So we have people who can help you have a little focus group discussion, you know, well moderated and comfortable, so people don't feel afraid, or you know, help you build psychological safety in the workplace, that it's okay to talk about things that bother me without fear of repercussion, with the belief that things will change, you know. So we have coaches as well who will help you on a one-on-one basis work through those things. Nice. Well, Antonia, thank you so much for joining us on this very important day, Zero Discrimination Day. I know that we can go on and on, but I'm thankful for the little snippet that we had, and I hope that people are listening so that they can reach out to the association if they need assistance with this. So thank you so much. And that was Miss Antonia Ferrier, the treasurer at HRMATT, just giving us some information about how we can move towards sort of more acceptance, inclusion, and of course, zero discrimination in society and in our workplace. You're on the Now Morning Show. We're going to take a break and be right back. Up next, we have arts and culture with Ainka. Stay with us.